Hello and welcome to Spark Practice and to tonight's Better Lessons Now workshop. I'm Sarah Niblack. I am the founder of Spark Practice and the head nerd here. And we've been going strong for about a year now, teaching people how to practice and also preparing for auditions and competitions and just sort of musician life in general. A little bit about my background. I play viola professionally in Paris, France, and I freelance with a bunch of different national orchestras, chamber music, recording sessions, the happy life of a happy freelancer. When I was in school, I went to Cincinnati Conservatory in the States, and I studied with Masao Kawasaki, who taught violin at Juilliard. He's now retired. And I went to music school on a rowing scholarship, which is kind of weird. And as part of stepping into my role in Spark Practice, I am the only person from my region to qualify for nationals in 3 events in the same year. I went several times to nationals. I've done a lot of international competitions as well. I was ranked top 10 in the US in rowing and indoor machine competition and outside in a real boat. I also am the first woman and the second person in the history of the Cincinnati Conservatory to go to that conservatory on a rowing scholarship. The first person was a football player who played tuba in the 1940s. What that brought me was a lot of experience working with national team coaches and Olympic coaches and rowers from around the world who were used to striving for excellence. We had a level of support and a level of structure that made it so that we knew exactly with total confidence that in 8 months on Saturday at 10:32 a.m., we would be our best selves for the race we had coming up. So when I got to conservatory, which, CCM is a pretty big school in the States, studying with one of the master teachers of viola playing in the world, and I had 1 lesson a week. And the rest of the time I was supposed to be by myself, and there wasn't a plan, and I didn't have any structure and all of that. I felt really lost. I felt like I had just missed the trick. And it's not for lack of trying. My teacher from home was one of the great quartet players in the States. His name was Irvin Eisenberg, and he was in the Philadelphia String Quartet. So I've been really lucky to have master teachers the entire time. When I got to France, my teacher was Laurent Vernet, the principal of the Paris Opera. So I've had this legacy of master teachers, which is incredible, but we're missing an element of support and structure and confidence in the work that we're doing in the conservatory environment and the music teaching environment that we have on an intermediate, and definitely we have on an elite level in sports. When I was a rower, we were accompanied in our practice 70 to 80% of the time, even on an international competition level. So imagine that 60 to 80% of your time on the instrument was accompanied by a master teacher, and how that would be really, really different. Another part of that was that I knew exactly what I needed to do when I showed up to practice. All I had to do was show up with a good attitude, and I knew that the rest was structured and taken care of for me so that I would be developing correctly with the rhythm of the training cycle, but also my body could catch up and my mind could catch up, and that I was strong in every arena of competition. This is something that we're going to talk about in a minute as it relates to music, because it's also just as important in music. Okay. So this really complete sort of sports background showed me how different the music community really was. I felt really lost for a long time. And I think that it's very silly that in musical education, and especially in a conservatory setting, we learn our instrument, theory, history, stuff like that, but we don't learn how to practice. And when we articulate it that way, the feedback that I get all the time is like, "Oh my gosh, that seems so obvious. Why don't we?" Well, it's pretty simple. We haven't talked about it before, and there hasn't been an easy system to be able to teach and apply before. Spark practice is here for that gap. Okay. And what we do at Spark practice is threefold. We teach and we learn. We put it into action, and then we have the community. So we have learning and action and the community. So in the learning part, that's where there are different classes about how to practice, and there are a couple of things coming out that we'll talk about at the end. But it's also where we're getting all of this theory of neuroscience and sports psychology and sports physiology training and training cycles and all of that, and the musical background and mindfulness and all of that. And we're really digesting the theory, but also we need to be able to put it into action. And that's where Spark practice really shines. And there's the unique formula and all of that we'll get into. But then it's also nice, we have all this theory, we're putting it into action for ourselves, and that we also have a community around which we can share these things, practice together. We have a yoga teacher, we have audition club where we're doing mock auditions regularly for other professional and pre-professional musicians around the world. And with these three different areas, we just boost our musicianship and us as humans being nice to ourselves, but also striving for excellence. Because we do want to strive for musical excellence, but we need to do it in a healthy, sustainable, and therefore intentional way if we want it to be safe and something that's interesting to us over the long term. So this is kind of where we're coming from with Spark practice. So this sports background and this top musical background combined with my obsession with neuroscience and neuroplasticity and mindfulness practices have really come and synthesized into a really easy system to apply. And once we get to know it a little better, it really sort of starts to change the philosophy of how we practice and move the needle on our playing and the way that we approach being a musician and expressing that and learning and then performing. Okay, so let's get into the good stuff for tonight. Tonight, we're talking about how to have better lessons. So this is really, as a teacher or as a student, we have different responsibilities, but we have an environment that's sort of a closed environment, but can be a stressful environment where we are learning. So I don't know if you saw the agenda, it's on Instagram and in one of the emails, but I'll go through it really quickly and then we'll really get into it. So just like in Spark practice in general, tonight we're covering theory, putting it into action, and then in the community we have time to ask questions and talk about stuff coming up and all of that. So getting into the theory part, just to go through the agenda really quickly, we're talking about our brains, and yes, there are multiple brains. Our brain on learning, bad is good and play is better. The brain on stress, neuroplasticity, creative versus constrictive, Spark practice in the studio, and then sort of risks, confidence questions, and where some of this breaks down or tends to break down. Then moving into the action part of tonight, we're going to be exploring techniques towards positive learning, how to teach auto-regulation and centering, the magical worksheet that I am very, very, very excited about. So we're talking about formats for success, student and teacher roles, mindfulness in the studio, what a playthrough really is, on and off instrument training, student autonomy and how to bring spark practice into the studio, and the worksheet. All right, so then afterward is discussion and community, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Please feel free to write down your questions. If you want to put them into the chat kind of as we go along, I will get to them at the end, or if I see that it's relevant to something that we're talking about right then and we need it to clarify, I'm happy to do that as well. Okay, let's get started. Better lessons now, sort of the theory behind all of this stuff and where it came from, is that essentially we have a couple brains. And we have our normal, just go through everyday life brain. And there's a ton of research on like what brainwave it is and kind of what state we're in and all of that. But essentially when we're talking about a complicated task that requires focus, especially when exposed to stress, we're talking about practice brain and performance brain. Now, essentially what our brain is trying to do in general is to use the minimum amount of energy possible and to keep us out of danger. This is how, as a species, we have survived this long. We still ask ourselves the same lame existential questions, but we've been around for this many eons to be able to ask those questions. So that's a pretty good thing because our brain is really, really efficient at just keeping us alive. This also means that when we feel stressed out and we feel like we're going to be in danger, our brain says, oh no, a lion, you're going to die. When in reality, it might just be, I'm playing for my teacher, or I have an audition, or I would like to play for my grandma, or whatever. And so your brain is saying, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm in danger. I'm going to do everything that I possibly can to keep you safe. Do not put yourself into danger. It's not worth it. This is where performance anxiety comes in. This is where so many things happen. And I've been doing some research with my audience on social media to find out kind of how this expresses itself, because we have a couple different breakdowns of how to look at stress responses that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But essentially what we really need to know is that when we feel like we're vulnerable, when we feel like we're in danger, our brain is going to freak out unless we train it. Okay, so this is where the two brains come in, the performance brain and the practice brain. This is where we're engaging this activity. The practice brain is really the curious detective brain. What's going on? How can this be better? Is this really how I want this to sound? Is this really how the fifth should sound in relation to the tonic and what key I'm actually in? Oh my gosh, it's pretty weird that I'm playing, the third scale degree on the downbeat. I wonder what that's about. What does that mean in terms of my phrasing? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the practice brain is the curious, critical, let's go discover what's going on brain. And like a muscle, we train it. And we train it to maybe not ask questions like, I know this is wrong, and I know this sounds bad, and this is ugly, and doesn't smell good, or, like whatever our critical brain can come up with. We're training it to ask questions toward learning, toward a positive forward motion, something that can help us discover something where we're no longer emotionally attached to it, but we're saying, hey, what's going on in this picture? The performance brain, however, is really the creative brain. It's really telling us, okay, I'm going to create this entire world in rich colors and high definition. And I know that over here, there's going to be a happy little cloud and a happy little tree and, all of that. And over here, this is the valley of sadness and it's going to be dark and it's going to rain. But then over here is a tiny little plant. And, it's an ideation of things. I'm creating a new world. I'm stepping into it, and it involves all of our senses. And it's really interesting because some people can experience this in the mind alone, and some people can't necessarily see colors or smell things in their mind or whatever. So we work with what we've got. There's no problem if, and I can't remember the scientific term for this right now. If we can't bring these things into our mind at first, that's fine. We do the best we can, and usually we'll get somewhere with it or find a way to sort of compensate. Practice brain and performance brain are different. It turns out that we can't criticize and create at the same time. So we need to learn how to do both. And we need to learn how to not have a permeable membrane between the two, which is why in Spark Practice, we practice performance in every practice session. All right, so the brain on learning. Learning is pushing boundaries. Learning is going from being terrible at something to being good at something, or at least better at something. Okay, so especially as adults and, children who are either in sort of high pressure situations or have a lot of expectations, but especially as we get older, we get worse at being bad at stuff. Because the brain on learning, something that I say all the time is that it's not practice makes perfect. It's not practice makes progress. It's practice makes pathways. We're laying these neurological pathways in our brain, which is so cool, but it also means that, we have a little bit of choice in it. And with neuroplasticity, we'll talk about this a little bit more. Okay. But it also means that we can repair stuff or choose new pathways, which is very exciting. But the brain on learning is really about pushing these boundaries and feeling uncomfortable. So we have to get used to this sort of discomfort, the time that it takes to build that muscle and build that confidence that we're pushing our boundaries in an exciting way that's fun for us, but also that we have that sort of desired degree of difficulty, which is usually about 70%. If we're at about 70% maxed out, that's sort of the sweet spot for pushing ourselves, but in a sustainable way that's going to keep us away from burnout. So then the trick is maximizing that 70% and building kind of our training program in a way that's going to help us get to where we want to go in a really efficient way. Okay. Bad is good, play is better. We have to be comfortable being terrible at something. The better we can be in ourselves of saying, oh my gosh, I tried this and it absolutely did not work. And it absolutely didn't work in this reason and this reason and this reason. This is practice brain, the detective. We're discovering what's going on. We're discovering why. Okay. But we can also say like, part of it was successful, but globally, I just completely face planted. That's great, because it's just information. And the more that we can sort of take these risks, and the more that we can try things and expand those boundaries and feel that sort of discomfort, try again. There's also an element of set a hypothesis, test it out, reflect, rinse and repeat. Okay, so we're not just bashing our head into a wall. Okay, we're trying to do this in a way that is still productive and is still like, okay, that didn't work. What do I like about it? What do I not like about it? Let me try a different modified hypothesis and go there. Okay, because again, practice builds pathways and we're just trying stuff out. The more fun it can be, the more it's going to stick in our minds. Okay, and the more that we're going to find something that really corresponds to what lights us up. All right, so play, it's been demonstrated in several studies that play is actually the way to get stuff to stick the best, which is why we spend a lot of time on games, which is why anything that's sort of gamified can be really enthralling and enticing and all of that, because we want to do that. And we end up knowing a lot about it just because we're making those connections in our brain and we're engaging in play. Okay. In terms of lessons, I don't love gamifying everything. I think the game of actually like trying to do something well and discover what we want to say and putting it all together is pretty interesting in itself. But there's a little bit of like vegetable eating in some technical arenas and all of that. So there's space for all of it. But as much as people are trying to sort of gamify everything right now, I'm not sure that that's really the best strategy. However, making it fun to say, hey, okay, so let's see if we can try this passage in 5 different ways. How does this sound as a rugby player? How does this sound as a ballerina? How does this sound as a leaf? How does this sound as as purple? Whatever, really looking into a bunch of different areas. And this is something that Spark Practice has built into the structure, into the framework. So it totally supports that. That's going to be something that is stickier in the mind. And actually, there's a study that says that it takes 10 times fewer repetitions when the person thinks that they're playing or is playing to get something integrated in a sustainable and durable way than if it's just rote repetition in sort of a vegetable eating sense. So we really want to have fun with this, because at the end of the day, what do? We play an instrument, we play music. So to be creating, again, performance brain and creating and through play is really the best way to express ourselves and also really integrate all the things that we need to be super strong on stage. Okay, the brain on stress. This is gonna kind of group into creative versus constrictive. What happens when we're stressed out? Well, I did a little study with everybody I know on social media, and we had in total over 100 responses, so we can consider it statistically significant. However, I'm not going to be writing a paper about it yet, which tells us how people experience stress in a couple different ways. First of all, we have our basic fear response, which is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And this is something that we talk about in Spark Practice. There are videos about it on Instagram and on the website, where we have different fear responses that come out in different ways. Like fight, usually people will kind of crisp up and start playing in a really aggressive way. Flight, the mind will start to go nuts. of, I just want this to get over. Maybe we'll start rushing. Like, oh, I need to get off stage. I just need to get out of here. Freeze. That's where like memory slips happen the most. This is, oh my gosh, what happens next? And you just kind of blank out. And fawn can be, you lose your sort of internal pulse. You think, oh my gosh, did somebody cough? Are they what do I think, what do they think about my playing? Like, oh, maybe I'm just sort of follow the accompaniment, or and you sort of lose yourself in it. So it's funny, I think it's so funny that our basic fear responses actually express themselves in the way that we play. And in my little survey, people were all across the board. It's so interesting. Like, it's really, really varied. And so it's very important that we know that, because it hugely impacts how we teach. It hugely impacts how we're going to approach our students. It hugely impacts how we're going to be able to equip them with techniques that they need to address their own personal composition. Okay. Another survey that I did was about where this shows up in the body. Well, first of all, one of them was, does stress tend to manifest itself more mentally or physically? And again, pretty much down the middle. So we have both physical symptoms going on and mental symptoms. And what I mean by that, physical symptoms, very much like tummy in knots, starting to shake, throwing up, all of that stuff. And mental symptoms are negative self-talk, catastrophizing, crippling anxiety, stuff like that. Okay. This is also why beta blockers work for some people and not for others, because beta blockers tend to be better with people with physical symptoms, and they don't work at all for people with mental symptoms. Okay. Not an endorsement, but also just like take it into consideration. Okay. So of the people who had physical symptoms, I asked, where does this show up in the body? And some people get dry mouth, some people get shaky legs, some people get an icky tummy, some people get rashes on their hands, some people get headaches, again, all over the board. I asked, what happens with people with mental symptoms? Again, all over the board, things that we just said, racing thoughts, crippling anxiety, catastrophizing, doomsday scenario, everybody hates me, and then the theater catches on fire. Like, I don't know, whatever. And so all of this stuff, like we said at the very beginning, all of this stuff is our body and our mind trying to keep us safe, trying to not put us in danger. Okay. So in reality, it's a very good thing that this happens. In practice, it really stinks if we're trying to go on stage and have a performance and all of that. However, if we know these things, and especially if we're taking lessons or we're teaching lessons, knowing these things means that we're equipped to be able to build this into our practice, so that when it comes time to get on stage, we've already developed sort of a digestive system for stress. And we have some urgent care triage tools, so that when we get on stage and our brain starts to freak out and keep us safe, we can say, you know what? Thanks, brain. This just means that it's important to me. So I know what's going on. I have tools to deal with it. But you know what? Thanks a lot for giving me a heads up. Okay. Talking about neuroplasticity briefly. Neuroplasticity is the idea that the neurological connections in our brain can be modified. It's just as simple as that, and it's pretty amazing. And it can go from being modified in the sense that we are building a pathway and building a connection. It can also be in the sense that something that's already connected, we would like to connect it differently. This is something that we talk a lot about in talk, what happens a lot in talk therapy and CBT and stuff like that. But we can use a lot of those theories and a lot of those practices to help support neurological safety in the practice room, in the teaching studio, and on stage. I think that's pretty amazing. So again, practice builds pathways. What does this mean? Well, you've probably seen images, because now we don't just have diagrams, we have images of neurons reaching out and trying to make a connection. This is incredible because usually we have a little branch that comes out, and then it sort of spreads out, and then eventually there's another branch that sort of spreads out, and then they'll connect and they'll be like, okay, great, we're gonna party now. All right. So when there's something that's starting to branch out, these are all the different pathways, and it could just as easily go over here in the other direction or whatever. But with intention and the right kind of structure and the right kind of advice and practice techniques and all of that, we can get that to connect in the way that we really want it to. Okay, so what this also means that something that's already connected, if we're starting to go down the pathway, we can be like, hey, no, we're going to go into a different arena over here, and we're going to look over here and make a pathway over here. Okay, so we really have this possibility that's amazing to help build connections and build pathways. And then what happens is that once that pathway is really connected, it gets wrapped around with a white substance called myelin. This is called myelination. And it goes from being a bushwhacked path in the woods to an automated superhighway. This happens through a couple different phenomena called, like, blocking is one of them. Imagine, remember how we learned to read. It went from a bunch of random stuff to symbols that meant something, to symbols that next to each other spelled a word, and that word meant something. And now when we look at a block of symbols, it goes straight to meaning. That's pretty incredible. Okay, so learning is developing all those pathways and using all of that energy. Learning is not energy efficient. We can make it more energy efficient than just beating our heads against the wall and hating ourselves while we're trying to learn, if we have the right strategies and the right framework and the right support and all of that, and encouragement and invitation to play and to create and all of that. But really, learning, if you go into a class that has a ton of information, usually you come out tired. That's because your brain is working really hard. This is why, as teachers and as students, we need to have a structure to support that, because we tend to lose so much information in this exchange. And then also on top of that, we're really tired and we don't necessarily have a net and a way to organize it so that it becomes productive for us in the future. Okay. Creative versus constrictive. This, it's backed up by a ton of different studies. However, we can also anecdotally, everybody in themselves, think of a time where you were vulnerable and you got shut down. You got criticized. You were judged. Was that the easiest environment to continue to be vulnerable and creative? Maybe not. Scientifically, no way. So what we need to do is create, and as a player, as a teacher, in any of these exchanges, what we're striving for is creating an emotional environment and sort of this context in which we're able to have an exchange that encourages learning and play and discovery in a creative, expansive way, and not in a way that makes us shut down and not want to explore pathways. And then instead, we do learn, but what we learn is that if we're vulnerable and if we try something and if we explore something and it's not right or it's not perfect or it's not what our teacher wants us to do or exactly something like that, that it's bad. This is different than bad is good, and that being terrible at something at the beginning is fine. If it becomes a character judgment, we're not in the right place. Okay. So we need to be really careful about having this sort of environment that's protected in a way to be able to explore things and try things and figure out the best method and the best way forward for us. We can, again, strive for excellence. Absolutely. But do it in a creative, expansive, playful way, and not in a constrictive, character judgment, damaging way. Because with neuroplasticity, we are learning anyway. And so if we, and for example, people who have negative feedback loops of negative self-talk, we practice that because it's the easiest path and we just keep doing it because we haven't intentionally interrupted it and chosen a different path yet. So just know that whatever you're doing, it's a choice in some ways because you continue to do it, even though it takes a huge amount of energy to change. But I always do this. I've always done it this way. I feel like it'll always be like that. And to move, to shift to something else. Okay. This is where we're going to talk about mindset. All right. And mindset's really important. There are 3 main mindsets. The first is fixed versus growth mindset. Now, this was brought into popularity by a researcher named Carol Dweck out of UCLA. I think she's out of UCLA. And the idea is that in certain areas, we'll have more of a fixed mindset. In certain areas, we can have more of a growth mindset. Nobody is all one way or the other, period. In pretty much anything, but especially this. Okay. So what this means is that in a fixed mindset, we hear things like, oh, well, I'm not good at math. Or I'm never going to get that shift. Or that person's so much better than me, like I'll never get there. They started earlier than me. They have a better teacher. They have an easier life. They'll always be better. Things that limit yourself from the get-go, saying things are this way, it is fixed this way, and they will not move. Whereas a growth mindset, we hear things more like, oh, I haven't gotten this yet. Oh, this is tricky to understand, but I'm pretty sure that I can figure out the answer. I struggle with math, but I'm playing a game every day with math, and I'm getting better at it. It's this idea and this, again, mindset that we can improve. Whereas the fixed mindset is that we won't improve and it will always be this way. You can see how one of them is more conducive to faster progress, and the other one is sort of Sisyphus pushing that rock up the hill, and it's just coming back, because we believe that we're not going to be able to do it, instead of using our practice brain and our performance brain to creatively find a solution and then step into that solution in creating a universe and like making that happen. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is abundance versus lack. The easiest way to illustrate this is with money. If you have a lot of money and you don't stress about it, you know that you'll always have what you need. You know, not necessarily a lot of money, but like comfortably sufficient money, and you don't have to worry about it. Then the choices that you make will be based on other criteria, like how you feel, whether you really want something. You know, if all of your friends are going to a coffee shop, you know, do you want to get the cake? You can afford it. Well, maybe not, because you're just not that hungry. Or, you know, oh man, I really do want cake. I'm gonna get cake. I'm all for cake. Also, I don't eat gluten or dairy or eggs, so that's kind of a bummer for me. But there are other ways to cake. It's fine. See, growth mindset. In lack mindset, it's sort of, oh my gosh, I only have these limited resources. You know, everybody's better than me, and my teacher gave me this tool, and they told me about the amazing slow downer or whatever, and I'm not going to tell anybody else about it because I don't want anybody else to go ahead. This happens a lot in conservatory, by the way. So which is better? I don't know. You have to protect your head for sure. And some people are takers, and they're gonna not be gentle with you or that information, and that's different. But if you say, if your mindset is geared more towards, you know what, I know that the resources are out there, and I'm gonna go find them, and I know that I will be supported in this, and I know that, you know, I'll find the best way forward. That's a very different attitude, and it produces a very different result. The third mindset paradigm is courage versus fear, or love versus fear, which is the idea that everything that we do is based in either love or courage, or it's based in fear. So this could be, I'm on stage, I'm about to play, I have done the work, I have my centering routine, I have in my mind how I want it to sound, I'm breathing, I'm doing the thing, I've called in the image, I've created the universe, and all I need to do is like join it and start to play. If I come at that with like love and courage, maybe that means that I'm going to want to share more. It means that I'm going to be interested in developing that universe and telling that story and getting my audience to participate that, and feeling what I want to feel with them and helping them feel what I'm trying to communicate and all of that. Or I can be afraid, and then my fear responses kick in, and I have to navigate that. And either I can be sort of taken over by that, or because I spark practice and I know how to do this, or I have other modalities, I know what to do to triage these fear responses, and then I can step back into courage. Okay. But think about it in your daily life. Any decision that you make, whether it comes from fear or it comes from love, you're here tonight probably because you're interested in learning, probably because you're interested in showing up for yourself, probably because you're, you know, somebody that you respect told you that this is going on and whatever. And the fact that you're here and the fact that you're curious means that you're stepping into that courageous part of things. You're stepping into that abundance part of things. You're stepping into that growth mindset part of things. And in these three different paradigms, they're expansive. Your world is getting larger. Okay. However you come away from this evening. Whereas if you were afraid and you think, oh, well, I can do everything the way that I've always done it, and I don't really want to mess that up because it's, I'm struggling already and whatever, then you wouldn't be here. That would be because you were afraid. That's fine. But you're here. So that's amazing. And we can move forward in that sort of expansion and all of that. And this is something that we want to cultivate for our students as well. We need to sort of know what's going on for them, where their stress shows up, how their brain works, what their sort of composition is, whether they have more stress responses or, like in the body or the mind, and how it shows up, where sort of their mindsets are about different things. These are tools that as teachers and, as students really help us show up to a learning exchange in a way that supports everybody and supports the conversation, so that the students get the most learning out of their teachers, and teachers share more of their expertise and aren't blocked in just a routine of repeating themselves or, kind of banging their head against the wall of how do I get this student to advance. We don't have classically a lot of tools to talk about these things in a music teaching setting, but I'm here to change that. And I think it's really important as part of supporting this idea of striving for excellence. And also, I'm over the idea that having a nervous breakdown is something that should happen to everybody. This is ridiculous. We have so many more tools than that. We do not need that anymore. I will stop my little rant. However, as teachers and as learners and as students, whatever our role in an exchange can be, or as administrators, we need to be thinking about other ways to bring these things in so that both sides are equipped with other ways to support this exchange and other ways and a framework to be able to inspire the sort of favorable ecosystem for learning and performance. Okay, Spark Practice in the studio. Spark Practice, if you're new to Spark Practice, welcome. First of all, it's great to have you. Also, there are so many things you can do with it. The goal basically is to be strong and neurologically safe on stage in the 3 zones of expertise, which are mentally strong, musically strong, and mechanically strong, or technically strong. Without these 3 elements, we have a mediocre performance, basically, and we have a mediocre exchange. So when we think about what makes a performance really great, it tends to be freedom, technical mastery. It was so musical, and it just seemed like pure communication. Whatever. I've done a couple surveys on this, and I'm going to do more because I think it's really interesting. Like, what makes up a great performance? And sometimes it'll be, that just their stage presence and communication, even though it wasn't technically as brilliant as it could have been. Or it could be, this person was technically flawless. It felt a little cold. That means that musically, mentally, musically, and mechanically, things aren't at the same level. Okay. Wherever we are, that's fine. But it's good to know sort of how those things are dosed out, and the way that we use Spark Practice to improve them is that we're going to be using specific strategies in each of the 5 pillars of Spark practice to move through our practice sessions and really boost those areas so that we are working in a way that uses neuroscience and uses elite sports psychology and training and everything that we know from top musical training and our master teachers and all of that, to be able to bring up that level in a way that's really coherent and really homogenous. So the Spark pillars are Spark, sound, performance, attuned intonation, which is also the harmonic context, rhythm, and kinetic integration. If you want to know more about Spark practice, I'm happy to talk about it. There's a website, sparkpractice.com. I'm on Instagram. I go on there and talk about a bunch of different stuff, and you'll see. Welcome to the party. There are classes. Some of you have already been through them. And there are more classes coming. We'll talk about that at the end, but we're here tonight to talk about what happens in the classroom. So let's get back to that. So Spark practice in the studio, which we'll get to in a little bit with the worksheet, is just a way to have a conversation around the different elements of music making, the Spark pillars, so that we can boost those areas of expertise, those zones of expertise, mental, musical, and mechanical. And this is something that knowing these elements of how stress works and how learning works and how play is important and all of that, as teachers and learners, we can be going with the grain of our sort of unique composition, or the unique composition. And, it's almost like the morphology, the sort of psychological morphology of our students, to be able to support them in a way that helps them develop this confidence in a really holistic way, and therefore have the tools that they need to battle their own dragons and also be really efficient in the practice room so that they have confidence and success on stage. All right, risks, confidence, and breakdowns. So risks in the practice room is that you don't have a trusting relationship, that somebody comes to the relationship with a lot of their own baggage that's not dealt with, that is brought into the classroom in a negative way. It can be that you start a process with a student and either it's interrupted in a sensitive place, or you just don't have the tools to really support that. Confidence, things, and these risks, the whole idea of tonight and the whole idea of this worksheet and the workshop in general is to help reduce these risks and improve on the result. Improve those relationships, improve ways to communicate better, improve ways to self-regulate, improve ways to communicate competences and deal with dragons, okay? To build in the sort of neutralizing of stress into the way that we're teaching and learning, so that as we take that into the practice room and take it back into lessons and take it back on stage, that these elements are already part of the conversation, so that we're building our strategies and we're building our music making in a really complete way. Okay, again, we're reducing these risks of damage physically and emotionally, and really maximizing potential, and potential of what we can give as teachers, but also the potential of our students. And as learners, we're maximizing our potential of what we can get out of these exchanges as well. Confidence. Well, confidence is something that comes with experience and trust, right? So as we have positive experiences in ourselves, we can start to build trust with ourselves. We can also start to build trust in learning. We can start to build trust in discomfort. We can start to build trust as we develop these muscles and these reflexes of the practice brain and the performance brain. We're developing confidence and trust with ourselves, and then also the people that we choose to be vulnerable around early on in the preparation process, aka that's usually our teachers, or maybe it's our close friends in the studio or sort of around. All right, so what this means is that early in the preparation process, we need to be able to develop this relationship with ourselves, and then have a really trusting, positive relationship with the people that we look up to and the people that we choose to be vulnerable around, that we're in, this learning environment with them where we can try things out, that we, are playing in a way that we're not going to be negatively judged. Our character isn't going to be criticized, especially if we're giving our all and trying, trying to learn in, what the teacher is presenting, or, we're pushing ourselves, that there's that sort of safety net of confidence and trust. Breakdowns. Okay, this is very important. Everybody breaks down. This is different than a nervous breakdown or some sort of psychological crisis. These are very different things. If you have trauma and stuff that's very much not okay and all of that, talk to somebody, talk to a mental professional. It's just like having a cold. You go to the doctor. If you're not feeling well in the mind, go see a doctor. It's the same. Over the taboo about mental health. Okay, squash. All right. Learning is hard. Being vulnerable is hard. It takes a lot of energy, and sometimes it's frustrating, and sometimes people will break down. This is something that happens in the practice room, in the online membership, in Audition Club, a lot. We're preparing for professional auditions, we're preparing for competitions, stuff like that. It's kind of a high stakes game. And we're doing that in a very sort of safe way. We're doing that in a very positive way, and with our teachers is the same. But, usually now, even in members of the practice room will be more open and try more things than they do with their teachers, because we've cultivated a different dynamic and we're really careful about the vibe and how people interact, because we're using all of these tools in our community setting, right? Okay. However, in preparation for something or just in the process of learning, it's normal to freak out a little bit and feel lost and hit plateaus and get frustrated and all of that. Just like when we freak out because we have performance anxiety or something like that, that's our brain telling us, don't put yourself in danger. When we kind of hit a wall and we get frustrated, or we get a little bit angry with ourselves and our progress or lack of progress, or we hit a plateau or whatever, that's our mind and our body telling us, you're overwhelmed, you're oversaturated, there is too much going on. Okay, so this is where we're going to bring back in specific actionable strategies to be able to regulate our nervous system, to be able to reset some stuff, sort of clear the cache of our mental computer, and be able to move forward healthily. Okay, so this is sort of the theory chunk of tonight. Let's get into the action. All right, formats for success. So this is where we're exploring different techniques towards positive learning, how to teach auto-regulation and centering, and the worksheet. All right, formats for success. Now, I've done a lot of surveys. I love surveys. I love learning what other people wish they had, like professional players, what they wish they had, especially people who are currently teaching or have achieved a high level of success in their career. Most of that comes with a fair amount of baggage because we've been through the conservatory machine, which has not always been the most favorable of learning environments, even though we're striving for excellence and all of that. Well, we have more tools now, so it's getting better. But I love asking people about what they've learned over the years and what they've learned from their teaching situations and especially their learning situations. So something that's true for pretty much all ages is that structure is important. Structure in our daily lives is something that's very important to us as humans, but also structure in the classroom setting is hugely valuable, which means that in the time that we have in a lesson, we need to sort of break it down, at least in our minds as teachers, of how it's going to go. And as a student, we can ask, hey, what's the format for lessons? Do you tend to have sort of a format, or is it sort of a free-for-all? And if it's a free-for-all, maybe we can think of a format that's going to work for both of us to have the best learning environment possible. So we think about this lesson time as sort of like a story arc. All right. So we have an intro that's a little bit like, okay, we're meeting each other now. We're coming into the space. We're going to regulate together a little bit. So we have this trust and this confidence that we know we're in the space that we can try things and throw spaghetti against the wall. We generally have sort of a playthrough period, or, what we're going to learn what it actually is in a little bit, to have an element of reflection, to have an element of correction or learning, and then an element of planning, setting up expectations for the next time that we see each other. Okay, so what does this actually mean? All right, the intro, it's not just, hey, get out your instrument. This is the opportunity for us to check in with each other and make sure that we're both in a space where we can learn. We're both in a space where we're available to the other person for a learning exchange. Okay, this means that phones are away, or they're set up to record or film based on, what everybody's okay with. This means that you can do, depending on the teacher and depending on the student, maybe a breathing exercise if you feel like they're really activated. This is the place to co-regulate our nervous systems if we want to go there and if it's a safe place to go there. Sometimes we're in situations where the teacher that we're with isn't interested in that and doesn't have these tools. And so we bring ourselves to the exchange as regulated as possible to be able to participate with whoever's in front of us. Sometimes we're a teacher and we're interested in learning how to support our students in a deeper way to encourage their success as a holistic effort, so that they, as a whole person and musician, can be nice to themselves and strive for excellence. Okay. And we can bring some of these tools into the practice room and into the classroom to be able to co-regulate together. We'll get into a little bit of teacher roles and then a couple exercises that we can do, which we almost did at the top of the hour, but I wanted to do them now. I should have done them at the top of the hour, but darn it. Okay, the idea of a playthrough. This is not a playthrough. This is a performance. It doesn't matter whether it's the first time that you see the student with a piece or the first time that you're playing a piece for a teacher. We are throwing spaghetti from day one. Okay, so we're building all of the Spark Practice pillars into what we're doing from day one, so that when we're performing for our teacher, even if they're like very cool and they're just like, oh, well, you know, why don't you just get out your instrument and we'll just play a little bit. It's a trick. That's not what that means. It means it's an opportunity for you to practice your centering routine. It's an opportunity for you to go through what your pre-performance routine looks like. And it's an opportunity for you to throw spaghetti at the wall. Who doesn't like throwing spaghetti? It's so fun. I mean, even if you have to, sometimes it's annoying if you have to clean it. Okay. But this is not that kind of situation. You can just throw spaghetti. So as a student, what we need to do is we need to take that time to set ourselves up with our pre-performance routine to try it out. And then as we get better at refining our routine and centering, and we have better tools for that, it's going to go faster. And it's something that our teacher can actually comment on and help us with, because they've been on stage before. They know what it's like, and they probably have thought about this before. Okay? As a teacher, we need to make space for our student to come in as it's a performance, so that they feel like they can throw spaghetti. We need to know that they are setting up their pre-performance routine. We need to know that they are centering and activating for whatever they're about to play. And we need to see how they navigate that. What's working? What's not working? It's not just a playthrough, it's a performance. And so if we can bring that into the lesson situation and support it with all of the tools that we have for performing, centering, trail markers, all the things, and these are things that we talk about in Spark Practice classes if you're more curious about that. But bringing in all of these techniques into the classroom, for most students, this is already a stressful experience. So we need to be able to equip them with tools so that it's manageable. They start developing their digestive system of stress. And then when they get on stage, they're going to be so ready, because they've been building this in all along. The reflection phase is just saying, all right, how did your performance go? We're kind of just following the scientific method, right? Hypothesis, analysis, new hypothesis, rinse, repeat. Hypothesis, experiment, analysis, rinse, repeat. But the reflection part of this is really important, because if we just say, no, that was bad, do this better, see you next week, that's a really low value lesson. We have done diddly squat for our student, and we have done diddly squat for ourselves. Because as a teacher, we haven't communicated any of what we know. And as a student, we just feel bad. So instead of that, we can look at this moment of reflection and say, okay, what was successful? What wasn't successful? I encourage using Spark Practice, the going through the pillars and saying, look, like, okay, you are generally really strong musically. You're pretty good mentally. Mechanically, this needs work, this needs work, this needs work. Already, instead of just saying, oh, I didn't like that play, you're saying, okay, the script was great, the lights were terrible, and I think the direction was okay. You're refining these things so you know actually what to talk about. So it sets up a productive conversation. So from the 3 zones, mental, musical, mechanical, then we talk about the spark practice pillars. The sound was great. I could definitely hear that you had a concept of what you wanted the sound to be. The performance element, I saw you centering and then there was this gap and then I wasn't sure what happened. It seemed like you kind of got overwhelmed right before you started and there was an element of fear in there. But the recovery was great when you got to the next trail marker. Okay. Attuned intonation. This part was out of tune, but it was out of tune because the accompaniment is actually this, and we need to be thinking about this key. Rhythm. I absolutely felt how you wanted to structure the phrase. And in this piece, I see, 4 plus 4 not being really separate, but kind of an 8 plus 8. So maybe we can have this groove over a larger phrase. Kinetic integration. I saw that your tonguing and the fingering was a little bit asynchronous. Let's work on some strategies to bring that together. Okay, so now not only have you addressed these 3 main the 3 main zones of excellence, but also you're breaking it down into really usable strategies so that the student knows, and as a student, you know where you sit and actually how to ask questions, how to move the conversation forward. Okay, all right, so if this is really strong, I feel like if I focus on performance here, then all of a sudden this part lags behind. Or, if I think about, the rhythm here, then all of a sudden I lose the sound quality. And then you can start going back and really learning from your expert teachers, because all of a sudden you're having a different quality of conversation. Okay, so then when you go into the correction and learning phase, which is the part where you're actually going to be putting some of this into practice, and the teacher can deliver more of what their competence and what they actually know, you're absolutely supported in that, because you're not just stabbing in the dark. You have a way to have this conversation. You have a framework to have this conversation that's really productive, that builds confidence, that builds these connections and pathways in a positive and sustainable and durable sense, where this information is really integrated and you walk out of the lesson knowing what to do. This also means that as you go into a lesson, if you follow this sort of format, the intro, the performance, reflection, the learning part, and then planning is the last part. But in this sort of learning phase, as a student, you know that you're going to have different activities. And so you can set yourself up mentally and, prepare yourself psychologically for this story arc. You know that there's going to be an element of risk, of performance, of all of that. And then you also know that you're going to have a communal reflection about it, conversation about it. You're going to have an opportunity to learn with a framework that's going to help you ask the right questions. And then at the end, you're planning. And it doesn't take that long, especially with this worksheet that I'm so excited about. But as you get further into Spark practice, or just further into a conversation with your teacher, and if they have their own system, fine. I mean, Spark Practice is designed to support all of the different methods and all of the different philosophies and all of the different, teaching styles and stuff like this. It's a framework to have a better conversation that inspires better autonomy, that inspires better confidence, that helps people know exactly what they're doing. Okay. So in the planning part of it, the goal is that while you're looking for progress in the 3 main zones and the 5 pillars, you know exactly what your next steps are. Okay. And there's an element that you leave open-ended so the student can go further, but already they feel equipped, that they've better received the information. They have better tools. They have better strategies. Their toolbox is expanded by spending this time with you, rather than as a teacher just saying, I already told you to work on intonation in your scales. I already told you to practice this more. All of the things that our teachers just repeated to us, that as teachers, we find ourselves repeating. We no longer have to have that kind of conversation. Or if we do, it's just like, look, like, you know what? In evaluating the performance that you gave in this time of reflection, the rhythm, I'm not sure that we found the right strategy for you to improve in this yet. And then the student can say like, oh no, well, I didn't practice and I didn't think about it and whatever. And then in the learning part, you kind of bite-size a tool for them. But you're never having exactly the same conversation twice, which means that regardless of the investment of the student, they're still improving, which is great for us as teachers, even though we prefer students who practice some, at least, and as a student, instead of just being overwhelmed and not know how to digest what just happened, we actually have tools and we can say, okay, I didn't feel like rhythm was getting better either. However, now I know that if I work on it in this specific way, I know what to think about. I know how to feel about it. I know I have a couple of different things to try, and I feel equipped to be autonomous in my learning in this until the next time I see my teacher. Okay. So does everybody understand the format for success? This is the best format that anybody has come up with. All of the surveys indicate that these different phases of a lesson are, and in this order, is pretty much the best way to do it. So we have the introduction and the making sure that we're in a good learning space. We have the performance, reflection, the learning part of the lesson, and planning for the next time that we see each other. All right, student and teacher roles. As a teacher, we're responsible for self-regulation. It is not fair to a student to have them come in and for us to be totally dysregulated with ourselves, which means that if at the beginning of the lesson, we've been teaching for 10 hours straight and we haven't gotten to the restroom yet and forget about lunch, and everybody's calling us and students are trying to reorganize things and a parent is being stressful or whatever, maybe you need to take a couple breaths for yourself, bring your nervous system back into regulation, and then you're going to be ready. Okay. So we're going to go through an exercise that's really good for both students and teachers in a little bit. But the teacher, as a teacher, we need to be available to the student to participate in that learning exchange. As a student, we also need to be available to participate in this learning exchange. So that also means we need to self-regulate. We need to show up and be ready in our mind, ideally ready in our body. It's again that thing from rowing. All I needed to do was show up with a good attitude, and I knew that I would be in good hands. I had done the trainings that my coaches told me to do for the most part, because we're also human. I did them to the best of my ability, so that the next time I show up and my coach is there, I know that I have a structure, I have a format, I have a framework to have a great conversation and a great training that's going to move me forward towards my goals. Even if my goal is to get a medal at the Olympics, or to get a medal at Worlds, or to get a medal at Nationals, or to enjoy playing for my grandma. Whatever it is, we need to be able to have this sort of positive framework, an intentional framework. Spark practice is intentional practice to move us along and move the needle. Okay, so as a student, we need to be ready. We need to be able to show up auto-regulated, self-regulated, with a good attitude. Anybody who comes into our studio, and I'm speaking as a teacher now, anybody who comes into our studio, the student needs to know our expectations. Okay, they will not be able to meet them if they don't know them. The student needs to know, you are going to perform in my class. You are going to try learning exercises. We are going to learn in my class. Learning is uncomfortable. We need to work together so that we know how to create a confident, trust-based environment where you can best learn. But as a teacher, I expect that you will perform in my class, because I want you to be able to perform. I want you to be able to play in public, or for your friends, or on stage, or whatever your goals are. I want you to be able to perform. And we need to be able to create a safe environment for you to learn and to experience in a safe way the discomfort of learning. So we're pushing those walls out so that you're becoming more competent, and that you're becoming really strong in these 3 zones of excellence: mentally, musically, and mechanically. Welcome to the party. We're going to be throwing spaghetti. And everybody does that differently. Personally, in my teaching studio, I have high expectations, but also I really know what it's like to be human. So it's really important to me to have a good sort of ambiance, but also I want to take you as far as you can possibly go. And, right now, my classroom is teaching about practicing and teaching how to have a good lesson. And I really want you to walk out of here with tools to be able to put this into practice now, and some stuff to think about in the future. Okay. So mindfulness in the studio. Now, a lot of people are getting into mindfulness, and a lot of people are meditating, and a lot of people are blah blahing about a bunch of different stuff. What I'm interested in really is how mindfulness practices can help us regulate our nervous system. Okay, so this is again coming from the base competencies that built Spark Practice in the first place: neuroscience, elite sports, top musical training, and mindfulness. What's interesting for me is nervous system regulation and getting into mindsets that are going to help us be creative and expansive and strong musically, mentally, and mechanically. All right. So what does mindfulness have to do in the teaching studio? Well, a couple different things. First of all, it's a great way. Tools that we use in mindfulness practices are fantastic for helping co-regulate and get, especially in that introduction phase, make sure that we're in a good and positive learning space. Okay, so this is something that we can do together. Please come along with me. We're just going to sit comfortably. Nothing special. We're going to do 2 different types of breathing. The first one is we're going to inhale again, and then let it out really slowly. Okay, so this is especially if we're coming from a really dysregulated or a really activated space and we need to calm down a little bit. This is one of the best ways to take the edge off and just move back into a space that then we can choose what we want to do with it. So again, we're going to breathe in normally. We top it up, breathe in the rest of the way, and then we let it out really slowly. Okay, let's go. Okay, we're going to do that again. So we're breathing through our belly and our chest, and then we're going to breathe all the way up to the top. Okay, so breathe in, little extra, out all the way, really slowly. Okay, you'll find that put this on a post-it in a place that you're going to see it next time you feel particularly activated. And levels of activation, we didn't talk about tonight, but it's something that we talk a lot about in Spark practice. Different levels of activation, you have your sweet spot for your performance, but also just to understand a little bit what I mean by that. When you're really not activated, so like a 1 or a 2, kind of almost asleep. There's like nothing really going on, whatever. And a 9 or 10 is going to be like, oh my gosh, everything is happening. I totally don't know. Like going a million miles a minute. Okay. So, especially if we're above a 7, this breathing technique is really helpful for taking the edge off and taking us down into like a 5 to 7 is usually a good place to then be able to decide what we want to do with it. All right. So, one last time, just because I worked myself up there. Top it up. Out really slowly. So this is something that I suggest doing if you are running to a meeting or you're running to a lesson. That's the breathing that you do maybe 2 or 3 times before you walk in the door. Okay. And then when you walk in the door, now that we're a little bit more chill and we're a little bit less activated, we've taken the edge off. There's another exercise that's really great, and it's called 4-6 breathing. We breathe in for 4 and out for 6. Because anytime we breathe out longer than we breathe in, we're activating the parasympathetic nervous system that helps us bring it back into regulation so that we have better access to all of our systems. We're better oxygenated, everything's better connected, and we can be more chill and from a place of like open curiosity, expansion, creativity, and feel less constricted. So this is something that we need to be doing as a teacher or as a student, regardless. All right. So we're going to breathe in for 4 and out for 6. Ready to go. In for 4. Out for 6. One more time. In for 4. And now as we breathe out for 6, we're going to be reactivating, recentering to a space of engaged, exciting learning. Okay, so if you added that little intention at the end, you can see that your energy level isn't flat. You've come back to a place where you're ready to engage, you're more available and all of that. So one of the special magical parts of Spark practice is really adding that intention into what we're doing, so that as we're manipulating our nervous system and we're manipulating the way that we learn, that we actually are being able to fine tune ourselves and be able to understand kind of really what's going on in our system and how to use it for good. So these exercises are things that we can use in the practice studio and in the teaching studio and even on stage to help recenter, refocus, dump out sort of the existential lactic acid and be available to be able to continue engaging positively and creatively. All right, this is something that also, if we have this kind of relationship with our teacher, or if we're a teacher and we're interested in bringing this into our studio, this is something at the beginning of class that when you do it with another person, really develops this sort of like resonant synchronicity with the other person and really just sets the vibe for, it's sort of a brain hack shortcut to sort of co-regulation where you're going to be able to go faster, further faster. Okay. This is not appropriate for every situation. And obviously some people are not into that. So that's totally fine. People are people too. Everybody has their own composition. And, you know, some students will be resistant to that. And some teachers will be resistant to that. So you just got to work with it, whatever it is. But you, again, like we said earlier, you are responsible for auto-regulating yourself. So equip yourself with these tools so that regardless of the situation, regardless of the context, you are going to be able to be safe. Okay, playthroughs as performances. We sort of talked about this already, but again, what is a performance? It's something where you're putting yourself in the condition of communicating musical ideas in potentially a stressful situation. And so we want to be able to show our work in a way. And the best way to do that is to be strong mentally, musically, and mechanically. Okay. And by strong, it's not just, that's not what I mean. What I mean is to be secure, to be confident in that, to be radiant in that. You're prepared, you're ready, and you have the tools that you need to be neurologically secure enough to be able to show that off, to be able to communicate with your audience, to be able to touch them as people, tell your story, and really share the music that you've worked so hard on. Okay, and it is possible to work in such a way that you can bring that successfully to the stage. I was talking with a student last night and they were reflecting on how before, you know, you can expect a 40 to 50% loss of what happens in the practice room to when you get on stage. I no longer accept that ratio. You need to be able to show up on stage with more than half of what you've done. So now we're practicing in ways that boost the entire system, that support that entire system, so that when you go on stage, you've been practicing being safe in a potentially stressful environment from the beginning. So that when you go on stage, obviously your brain, like we talked about at the very beginning, is going to be like, hey, this is important. Ah! You're like, buddy, I know. Everything that we've been doing to this point brought us to this point to be able to be here. So you can know I'm safe. I want to be here. Let's go make some music. Okay. On and off instrument training. Now, these are things that as teachers, it's important to develop a toolbox of practice strategies that work on the instrument and off the instrument, so that we can send our students out into the world and they can be equipped with things to do on the instrument and things to do at the grocery store or when they are going to bed or whatever. There's so many ways to practice with a very complete system. You know, if you use Spark Practice as a very complete neurological framework to holistic music making, be a badass and also be nice to yourself, okay? Be bold and be nice to yourself. There's so many ways to do that on and off the instrument. So it's just something to think about. We're not going to talk more about it tonight. There's so many strategies in Spark Practice classes and different programs, but just be thinking about how important it is to have a toolbox that also includes practice strategies off the instrument. Okay. Because what we're really looking for is student autonomy. There will be a point that as a student, we might not be in a learning situation with a teacher regularly. Either we're out of school or we're just in a different phase of life, or we sort of fell off the wagon and, you know, whatever. But there might be situations where we don't have a teacher that we see regularly. As a teacher, what we really want is to be able to communicate the maximum amount of what we know, to share that with our students, and so that they know what to do with it. It's that whole question of teaching somebody to fish rather than just having them over for dinner. Both are great. Okay. But also as a teacher, part of our mission and part of our job is to communicate and transmit what we know to our students. And part of that is how to keep going. Okay. So Spark Practice helps with that because it helps build student autonomy, like we were talking about before. It's a framework that helps have a different kind of conversation and also keep track of the progress and keep track of strategies and keep track of what you're actually communicating as a teacher. And all of the feedback that I've gotten from many different instruments and many different levels around the world is that when we're bringing Spark Practice and this sort of framework into the teaching studio, that students know what to do, ask better questions, and are magically more autonomous. So that's pretty cool. I'm all about it. Okay, it's time. It's the worksheet. It's the worksheet. Did everybody get the worksheet? It looks a little thing like this. Will be in the practice journal that's coming out for the holidays, and you have it so you can download it. Please, it does say do not reproduce. You have my permission to use it in your teaching studio. Print out some copies, bring it to your lessons, leave one in the bathroom. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But use this because it's awesome. All right, let's get into it. So this is the Spark Practice Lesson Booster. And I'm very, very proud of it. So, and being able to say that I'm proud of something that I did took me many years to be able to get there. So I'm just going to celebrate that moment. But also this is something that I'm just legitimately super proud of. And this is what I wish I had when I was studying. It would have made such a difference in my results and such a difference in my progression as a player, but also as a professional musician now. And just as a person, I know that I had expert teachers and like really the best. And it would have been really nice to have sort of a record of like, oh, right, this is what I learned from them. and sort of a vague, instead of sort of a vague recollection of like, oh, right. Yeah, something about my hand position. Cool. So let's change that. We're no longer having a conversation. Now we can break it down. All right. So you'll see at the top where you have, I don't know if I can get this to turn and if I can get it to show up on your screens. Maybe that, ooh, kind of. Okay. Maybe I've got to move this lamp. So you see at the top, it has all of the spark pillars: sound, performance, attuned intonation, which is also the harmonic context, rhythm, and kinetic integration. So what happens is that in the lesson, in the student's performance, the teacher can go through and say, you know what, your sound today, like it really came across what you wanted to say. It was super controlled. I understood what you were doing. I understood the colors, and they're like, globally it's pretty good, but there's some areas that we want to work on. That's like a 7 for me. Performance, and performance is not necessarily the overall thing, but it's the centering. It's, are you mentally, how are you doing mentally with all of these things going on? Also with managing your performance anxiety, also with managing all of these different elements of performance, your trail markers, your giant slalom, all of these things that, you know, we get into in spark practice classes, but also, you know, how do you manage performing? Maybe you were just about to start playing and instead you started shaking and then started crying. That's okay. We're throwing spaghetti, but that's probably a 3. And we're going to look at some really specific ways to boost that for next time. Okay. Attuned intonation. Maybe you've been working on your skeleton. Of course, I was going to talk about the skeleton. If you don't know about the skeleton, there's a video, and I have to make another video for another student soon. So follow the socials and come back for a workshop, because we're going to do a workshop totally on the skeleton. But maybe you've been working your skeleton and your intonation is sparkly. I'm going to give that a 9. There was just one note that wasn't quite, give that a 9. Rhythm, I absolutely understood the groove. I wasn't sure how you managed this one little transition. I'm going to give that an 8. Kinetic integration, well, that 16th note passage kind of got away from us, didn't it? That's about a 4 today. So in your performance of whatever program you're playing for your teacher, you're performing for your teacher can go through and be like, hey, this is kind of where we are. Now, obviously, this is going to change week to week, and this is a really great way to be able to kind of view your progress over time. All right. And all of these things, again, feed back into the 3 zones of excellence: mental, musical, mechanical. All right. So what you see right below that is going to be what happens in the planning part. Okay. So the lesson performance is what happens in the reflection part. Okay. Where you're working on that together to give feedback to your student, or get feedback from your teacher about kind of where things are in each different zone. Then when you're moving into the reflection part and the planning part, you're going to be thinking of, what are the specific strategies that I can use in the practice room, ideally that take 5 minutes or less, that are going to be boosting this pillar and addressing the things that need improvement in this pillar. Maybe throw something in for the things that went well. And you're like, oh, I love that. The skeleton makes me feel so good. I'm going to re-add that because it's something that makes me feel grounded and successful. And we need to be able to feel good about what we're doing as well. But all of these specific strategies, and here, look, there are 15. So depending on what kind of student you are, kind of teacher you are, maybe in the week, your student's going to get a couple practice sessions in. Let's hope for a minimum of 3. And if they're using Spark Practice, you can go on the site. There's the free timer. All they're going to do is just go across the line and check them off. So they know exactly what they're doing to start with next week, to get from here to the next time we see each other. All right. And this becomes part of their toolkit. This is also an amazing way for us as teachers to share what we really know. Okay. And this is something that in the learning part and the reinforcing and the correction part of our class, these are things that we can do together so that the student really knows how to put this into practice when they're by themselves. Okay, moving to the second part. It's super important when we're being critical to be positively critical as well. If we say something that isn't going well, and we're happy to break that down and be awful about it, that shows part of our character. But what shows a really great character is also to be able to say, you know what? This went well. And this was so much better than last week. So as a teacher, we need to be able to recognize the effort and the progress. And as a student, we need to be able to recognize where our work comes in and be able to acknowledge that we are making progress. This is something that I worked for and it got better. Then the big goal for this coming week or the next time, for the next time that I see my teacher, maybe it's to tackle a new concerto to the point where everything is in the hands and we're going to be ready at the end of the loading phase, this first getting it into our body part before we start to expose it to stress. Maybe it's to go through whatever scales and arpeggios and whatever key and an etude and make them as musical as possible. Maybe the big goal this week is to perform and record it 3 times. Whatever it is, that's something that you're going to be working on with your teacher. And for your teacher, that's something where they can say, okay, look, this student is struggling in these areas I'd really like to come up a little bit. Okay, so the goal is going to be something that's manageable, that's just outside of their comfort zone, so that they are equipped with how to get there. I've shown them that they can improve, and here's the goal, here's the carrot. Let's go for it. Okay, so you're giving them the stretch goal and also the way to get there. That's great teaching. Okay, so to break that down, then we go into the 2 big challenges. What are the 2 big things that we want to resolve? And these have to be specific things, because back home, the student has, the Spark Practice journal or the daily journal page, or they just do it on their own, but they're going to be working with 2 challenges all the time. So start them off with 2 specific challenges. And again, this ties back into the strategies that you're giving to resolve these challenges. We are leaving no one in the wild without food or water. Okay? 2 specific challenges. It might be the transition between these 2 notes. It might be taking time at the end of this phrase before we start the next session that's really busy. How do we do that? Tie those into specific strategies that you're giving them further up on the page. And then this is for the student. The questions that they're going to have for the next time you see each other. When they're working through this, students, as a student, you're going to start to find that things make more sense. As you start organizing and sort of clearing out the cobwebs of how all of this fits together, things make more sense. And so you're going to be asking better questions. Your question might be, well, okay, so I understand that I worked on the transition between these two notes in this way and this way, like you suggested, but I'm also finding that then if I do it this way, then 2 notes later, I'm struggling to get that in tune. Can we look at that? And that's something where the teacher can be like, oh, obviously, we're going to be working on your hand frame. Or, oh, obviously, you didn't support that breath in the way that got you over the top of the phrase. Oh, there's this other element of learning that I can bring to you. And so you've just gone further in a productive conversation with your teacher, and you're getting more value out of your lesson. You're getting more value out of that exchange, and you're learning more from your expert teacher. So you are better equipped to bring these questions to the next lesson. And as a teacher, it helps us engage with you. We understand more where you're coming from. As a teacher, we're inspired by questions. We want to go further. We want to teach you everything, okay? And if you bring better questions, we're able to give you better answers. And then also for the student, the big takeaway of the week. What did you learn this week? It could be, it's better if I breathe twice before I start my lesson. It could be working on the scale that corresponds to the key of my concerto really helped me hear the harmonies of my concerto better. It could be the specific practice tip from my teacher is really hard, but I finally started to understand it. It could be whatever. We don't care. It's your big takeaway. But it's something that just helps sort of mark the occasion of this effort, of this conversation, of this exchange. What I hope your big takeaway is for tonight is that the conversation can be different, and this framework can be helpful. And this framework that you can bring into your learning exchanges, either as a teacher or as a student, is something that can be productive and get you to your goals faster, better, in a more integrated way. Okay. So thank you so much for coming tonight. I hope you got a lot out of this. Please let me know what you think. Please use the worksheet in your studio, whether you're going as a student or a teacher. I'm absolutely open to feedback about it. And now I just want to tell you a couple things that are happening in the Spark Practice ecosystem. All right. For people who haven't been through the foundations class, it's now a video course online with calls that we'll be able to check in every couple weeks. So you can ask any questions that you have, and you definitely have this element of community as well. So that's on the website, the foundations class. There is a class that's coming up for people who have already been in the foundations class, because we've kind of been missing this middle step. And it's Spark Practice for teachers or as a student who's interested in improving these exchanges. And so that's going to be broken down into a couple things. Me as a teacher or me as a student, self-regulation, creating a learning space, safety, getting honest with ourselves. It's not always easy, but it's totally possible. Inspiring transformation, continued sustainable progress, and learning for performance. So those are going to be the modules over several weeks. That'll be coming out soon. In the follow-up from this evening, I'm going to be sending out an email that has the replay link. I'm also going to be sending out ways to engage with Spark Practice in the future. If you're an educator or a director of a school or something like that, We're starting to do in-school workshops, and I still have some availability for the summer, and for a little bit in spring, and then for the fall for next year. So festivals and stuff like that. I'm already in a couple, and I already have a few booked, but I do still have a little bit of availability. So I'm really excited about bringing that to your school and supporting your students and working with your students or your teachers or both. It's the party. Um, and then the other exciting thing is the practice room, which is our sort of online gym membership for musicians, where we have audition club, but we also have group practice sessions. We have yoga for musicians with Gwendolyn Condren, who is a professional violist as well as certified yoga practitioner. We have Alexander Technique. We have a bunch of different things, and all of these workshops are free. So tonight is just, I do something like this every month on a different subject, and I want to make sure that you get the most out of it. I'll give you something that you can actually walk away with about a topic that's relevant to what we're doing as a musician or as a teacher. So this is part of that. We bring in guests, we bring in guest juries, like a whole bunch of different stuff. So if you're interested in having a supportive environment of other musicians who are working just either to whatever goal, to whatever end, if you're interested in having a supportive community of other musicians who enjoy being around each other in a really healthy, holistic way, please consider joining the practice room. And we're gearing up for the 100 days of Spark practice at the beginning of the year, which is going to be so fun. And I have a couple big surprises for that, as well as other events across the year. And a really cool stocking stuffer this year is going to be the Spark Practice Practice Journal, which is coming out. That's dropping for December 25th. So you can pre-order it now on the website, and it accompanies you through 3 months, so 100 days of project planning and lessons and your daily pages and personal reflection and all of that, to really make sure that you feel great about what you're doing, and you're doing it in a way that takes you to where you want to be. Cool. If anybody has any questions, I love questions. The trickier, the better. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And yeah, we'll catch you very soon.